of July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg was one of the most critical battles of the Civil War. The battle was the centerpiece of the Gettysburg Campaign, which began in the middle of June 1863 when Confederate General Robert E. Lee marched his army out of central Virginia and north toward the Potomac River with the objective of invading Maryland and Pennsylvania. Lee had several reasons for wanting to invade the Union. His army was in need of supplies and raw materials that could not be easily obtained in the Confederacy. In the summer of 1863, the brilliant General Robert E. Lee was in command of the Army of Northern Virginia. He decided upon an invasion of the North, which would pull both armies from war toward Northern Virginia, where most of the fighting had previously begun. By invading the North, and particularly winning a victory in the North, it might cause disenchanted Northerners to pressure the Lincoln administration to seek a settlement toward peace, thus ending the war. The decision eventually brought the war to the doorsteps of a small rural central Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg. General Lee's hungry Confederates crossed the Potomac River, the border between Virginia and Maryland, and marched into Pennsylvania. There they found food, army supplies, and many frightened citizens. The Union Army, called the Army of the Potomac, cautiously followed Lee, shielding the capital of Washington, D.C. from Confederate forces, while Army Commander Hooker argued with his commanders for more troops. On June 29th, the Army set out their camps with a new commander, General George Meade, to find Lee and put a stop to the invasion. General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, 75,000 strong, was traveling north to central Pennsylvania. On June 30th, Lee learned that 95,000 men of the Union Army of the Potomac, led by Major General George G. Meade, were pursuing them. Lee ordered several brigades to travel east to check their locations, and in northwest of the town of Gettysburg they met. A skirmish ensued, and as battle heated, word was sent back to both commanders that the enemy was found and reinforcement troops proceeded to the area. Thus a battle, never planned, simply occurred by circumstance.
The citizens of Gettysburg left their houses, bringing food and picnic materials, just to watch the two armies fight.
The second day of battle was initiated by a series of uncoordinated and fragmented Confederate attacks on the Union defensive positions south of the town. While simultaneously attacks were supposed to have occurred on Culp's Hill and Cemetery Ridge, the attacks took place 6 hours apart and were unsuccessful. Though Union forces helped Culp's Hill, the Confederate forces did drive back the Union troops at areas referred to as Peach Orchard, Wheatfield, Valley of Death, and Devil's Den, with a staggering amount of casualties. The Confederate advance of the right flank had initially succeeded, but was stopped by heroic efforts of Union forces in an area known as Little Round Top. On the second day of battle, there were many casualties. Having been basically successful in 2 days of battle with the Union Army, General Lee, believing his army was invincible and undefeatable, decided to attack what he thought would be the weakest position of the Union line the next day. At the same time, General Meade held a council of war with his corps commanders and decided to remain in a defensive position for the battle anticipated the next day. Thus, the decision made by both commanders would lead to one of the most famous days of the Civil War. July 3rd. The third day of battle began with another unsuccessful attempt to take over and occupy Culp's Hill. Meanwhile, a mile east of Gettysburg, a Confederate cavalry of 600 troopers held orders to attack the Union rear. Union cavalry with a strength of 5,000 confronted them in a hot firefight that contained and turned the Confederates back. General Job Stewart led the Southern forces, and among the Union leadership was General George Armstrong Custer. At 1 p.m., the largest cannonade that ever occurred in the North American continent proceeded the planned charge. Unknown to General Longstreet in charge of the famous assault, the cannon fire, which was detonate to the Union center, overshot their target and did nothing more than devastate farm fields far beyond the Union troops.
When the cannonade ceased, 12,000 Confederate soldiers marched from Cemetery Ridge in parade dress formation to launch a famous heroic attack upon the Union Center. Forever ingrained and immortalized in history as Pickett's charge, the Confederates' objective was a small clump of trees 1 mile away from an open field. Once the smoke from the cannonade cleared the Union forces watched their soon-to-be combatant in awe. They admired the intense patriotism and desperate dedication of all the men before them. Still, once within range, the Union artillery hit and mowed the columns of men like blades of grass. 2 of 3 Confederate soldiers would not return.
Retreating back to Seminary Ridge, General Lee waited and upon seeing General Pickett and realizing the defeat had occurred, advised Pickett to reform his division in the event of Union counterattack. Pickett, looking at Lee, responded, "General Lee, I have no division." With these words, and after 3 days of devastating carnage, the battle ended with the Confederates being defeated and retreating back to Virginia the next day. Sadly, the horrors of the war would continue for another 2 long, bloody years. As the 2 armies departed Gettysburg to continue the war elsewhere, the 2,000 citizens of Gettysburg came out of their cellars and back from their hurried escape to nearby towns. They returned to a community left in shambles, with almost every property damaged, houses looted, and all crops and food destroyed or stolen.
The cost of the battle was high, 51,000 casualties, which are all the soldiers who were killed, wounded, captured, or missing. Every home and church in Gettysburg was a hospital, and every field and yard held a grave of a soldier, hastily dug and filled. To provide a proper burial for the Union dead, local citizens began a project for a national cemetery to be placed at Gettysburg. It was decided on November 19, 1863, and featured a short speech by President Lincoln.
By coincidence, or perhaps an omen, the next day happened to be July 4th, known as America's Independence Day. It was on July 4th, 1776, that the first 13 colonies formally broke away from Great Britain and formed a new nation called the United States of America. But civil war would now ensue.
Making my way downtown, walking fast, faces pass and I'm homebound.
Oh my gosh, baby, let me. I did it again, so I'm gonna let the. Oh my, baby, let me.
The brilliant General Robert. Shut up! The cannon fire was decimate to the center Union. Oh, she messed up. I said center Union Center.
Just to watch the battles fight.
The cost of the battle was high. 51 casualties, which were all.
The cost of the battle was high. 51,000 casualties, which are all.
Coincidence or perhaps an omen. No.